バーバラ・ミンツ先生で、シドニー大学の准教授の先生です。バーバラ先生のチーム、カナダにもですね、いくつかの国にまたがってチームメンバーがいるんですけれども、世界で最もですね、強力な COI 研究のチームでずっとこの研究を続けていらっしゃる先生方です。で、今回は特に医学教育に関わるですね、エビデンスやこれまでの取り組みのようなものをご紹介してくださるということです。お願いします。
Hello, my name is Barbara Mintzes. I'm an associate professor with the School of Pharmacy and Charles Perkins Center at the University of Sydney. And I wanted to start by thanking you for the invitation to this symposium. I'm going to be talking about initiatives to address industry influence in medical education and provide a brief international overview of the research. So to start, I have no pharmaceutical industry funding. I've been an expert witness for Health Canada on a legal case on marketing of an unapproved drug product. I'll be talking about what has been called the hidden curriculum, so pharmaceutical industry influence on medical education, and then initiatives by medical students to improve policies of the faculties where they're studying, and look a bit at whether these shifts of policy have made a difference. So I wanted to start with a systematic review that looked at medical students' exposure to and attitudes about the pharmaceutical industry. This systematic review included 32 studies in 14 countries. In general, what they found is that there was frequent exposure to pharmaceutical marketing throughout training, that students had more contact in their clinical years, that those who were studying at schools with more restrictive policies on conflicts of interest tended to be more skeptical about pharmaceutical promotion, and that the large majority of the students felt inadequately educated on interactions with industry that they would face once they went into practice. Our team as well in Australia looked at industry reports of sponsorship of events for health professionals between 2011 and 2015. And at that point, the industry in Australia was reporting on events they sponsored and how many professionals of different types attended and how much they paid, etc., but not payments to individuals. So at that point, we could say the events were ubiquitous, that there were over 600 per week in a fairly small country, population 25 million, that trainees attended nearly 40% of these events. Food and drink were provided to almost all of them, and the cost was 286 million Australian dollars. Another source of evidence in terms of the influence is case studies looking at industry-sponsored events in education. This was an article that looked at a one-week session that was on pain treatment, mandatory, that medical students and other health professional students attended at the University of Toronto over a 7-year period. They learned about a modified version of the WHO analgesic ladder for pain treatment, and you'll see that oxycodone is included step 2, so moderate pain, a mild or weak opioid. Now, in fact, that's a representation that can lead to expanded use, and this pain module was sponsored in part by Purdue Pharmaceuticals. So the other source of evidence in terms of problems in medical education is from legal cases in the United States on fraudulent marketing in which all the major pharmaceutical companies were actually found to be guilty of having marketed drugs for unapproved indications, often sometimes minimizing harm, various types of marketing that are illegal in the US, and often doctors were involved in these marketing activities. So what these would show would be a need for institutional change, and student associations began to look at this. The American Medical Students Association really spearheaded an initiative in the United States to carry out research on conflict of interest policies at all medical schools in the US. And this is just an example of the website that they then published each year, giving each medical school a grade and then providing information on their policies on a whole range of issues such as gifts, sponsored meals, speaking engagements by medical faculty, sponsored CME, and so on. Now, the first analysis in 2008 of this survey found that only 7 out of 150 medical schools received an A, in other words, strong policies, and many major medical schools with like Harvard and Yale had quite poor grades from the medical students. They didn't like this situation, and so a number of medical schools put together conflict of interest policies and conflict of interest committees and brought in policy change. And so by 2016, when there were 173 medical faculties in the US, a quarter of them had an A, so quite a few more, and 2/3 had either an A or B, so quite strong policies. A quarter had curriculum on conflicts of interest. More than half did not allow gifts to medical students from industry. A quarter did not allow industry-funded meals, and nearly 50% did not allow their faculty members to have consultancies to be on speakers bureaus for companies. So very important shifts in policy. And you'll see this is a comparison, only 14% as compared to 68% in 2016, only 14% in 2008 had strong policies. This is just an overview of the different criteria that have been included in the American and now in other national medical students associations research on their medical schools' conflict of interest policies. And this is a systematic review that was published this year that looked at all of the research on conflict of interest policies at medical schools. What they found in a nutshell was that the content of these policies varies widely, and generally the European institutions ranked quite poorly. In North America, the medical schools had stronger policies. This is probably because of research on these policies and accompanying publicity for a longer period of time. You'll see there were 5 countries, Canada, US, Australia, France, Germany, that were included in this systematic review, and Belgium had a 2021 study that was too recent to be included. So do these policies make a difference? A survey of medical students in the US found that those who were studying at schools with strongest policies were much less likely to receive gifts from industry, less likely to interact with sales representatives. So in that would say that yes, these policies are being implemented. The other measure of whether they make a difference is whether students, once they graduate, have better prescribing practices, that if they have graduated from a school with restrictive policies as compared to students who graduated from a school with fewer conflict of interest policies. This is a study that looked at prescribing of a newer antipsychotic drug, amphetamine, and antidepressant. In each case, they were very heavily promoted drugs, but without evidence of therapeutic advantage and costlier than equally effective alternatives. And students at the schools with stricter policies prescribed a lower proportion of these drugs. So just to say in conclusion that student-led initiatives for better conflict of interest policies among medical faculties really have made a difference. Currently, these types of initiatives to research and then publicize these policies have been carried out in North America, in a few European countries, and in Australia. What has made a difference has been both research and media coverage, and that has led medical schools to change their policies. So on that note, optimistic, I'll say thank you and leave. Bye.
はい、ありがとうございました。医学生主導でですね、このように医学部の、方針というか利益相反に関する、ポリシーを変更 してきたということで、非常にすごく驚いたとともに、日本、私も医学生でしたので、なかなか遅れてるなというふうに、何十年も遅れてるんじゃないかなというふうに思った次第です。で、やはり気になるのは、日本でもどういうふうにすればですね、同じような動きを起こすことができるのかというところなんですけれども、ぜひバーバラ先生のご意見を伺ってみたいというふうに思っています。
Dr. Barbara, thank you for your presentation, and here's our question. How can we let medical students begin a similar movement to improve COI policies in med schools in Japan?
Thanks very much for your question and also the invitation to speak. What's important about each of these initiatives in different countries is that the students have worked together. So the United States, the American Medical Students Association first developed a set of criteria and then surveyed all of the medical faculties. And that has happened then in Canada, in Germany, in France, in other countries, started by medical students. And they have shared the tools, the criteria. So it's certainly very possible for medical students in Japan to do the same, that particularly if the National Association of Japanese Medical Students was interested in carrying out a similar study, there are two things that they could do. Certainly they could get in touch with me and I would put them in touch with the other researchers, as well as sharing the materials we're using now in Australia, because I'm working now with the Australian Medical Students Association on a similar study. And the International Federation of Medical Students Associations, so this is the global network of all of the associations of medical students, also has a very strong policy on this.
Thank you very much. 今回バーバラ先生が日本の医学生が同じことをやる上で重要だとおっしゃっていたのは、人とつながることなので、すなわち今回の調査においても日本の医学生すべての医学部で調査をする必要があるわけで、その日本の全大学の医学生とコネクションをしっかり話し合って調査をすること、また同じような動きがアメリカで起こった後にフランスやドイツなどで行われて、そこで国同士の医学生の間での知識の共有があったということでした。で、もしも医学生の方がそのような動きを始めたい場合は、今おっしゃっていたのはバーバラ先生が今オーストラリアの大学で同じことをされているので、バーバラ先生に連絡を取れば、そのつなげていただける、ノウハウを教えていただけるということと、また国際インターナショナルフェダラルアソシエーション、その国際的な医学生連盟のようなところもあって、そこの COI ポリシーが厳しく定められているので、そちらも参考にしてくださいということでした。以上です。
はい、ありがとうございました。Barbara, thank you very much.
Thank you.